Employment equity has hit a snag in our country. After 28 years, it has failed to achieve workplace transformation. Well, that's according to annual reports. Since 2008 to date, black representation in top management has increased by just over 7 percentage points, from around 23.3 to exactly 30.7. It all became a talking point again recently after a leak of a DISCEM memo announcing a moratorium on the appointment of white people that sent the country into a bit of a tailspin, very divided views. It resulted in DISCEM coming out saying it did regret the wording and the tone of the memo. Let's bring into the discussion, and I appreciate the time for the Employment Equity Act. We talk about that now with the chairperson of the Commission for Employment Equity. It's Tabea Kabinde joining us this morning. Tabea, good morning to you. I appreciate your time. And it's interesting when DISCEM comes out and says they regret the wording and the tone, but many people are saying that DISCEM was actually right in what they were saying. They just said it badly. What's your view? Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, and good morning to your viewers as well. We truly believe that there was nothing wrong with the letter in as far as the content is concerned. What was problematic for us as a commission was the tone, yes, because the tone almost was dictatorial and the tone almost focused on what we often refer to as malicious compliance in as far as just pushing for numbers without really looking at substantive equality. It was also concerning to us that it was the first time that DISCEM was going to look at putting employment equity as part of KPIs of managers. So it clearly is something that they haven't focused on at a strategic level for the longest time.
And that's certainly what it's done, hasn't it, Tabea? It's brought the entire conversation around employment equity to the fore again as well, because regardless of race, what I saw a lot of people commenting about was exactly to your point, it's not just about numbers. Numbers are easy to fill. What you need as well is for that to be done on credit as well, to have deserving people in those positions as well. And I suppose that's where the argument and the correct argument around BEE gets diluted when you have critics coming out and saying, well, this is just ticking off boxes, because that's not the idea, but that's what the conversation has become.
Correct. That's very true. To a large extent, people confuse affirmative action with tokenism. Tokenism is when you put people in positions because they're from designated groups, but they do not really qualify for those positions. Whereas affirmative action is affirming people that meet the requirements of the job and also demonstrate potential to grow in areas where they may not necessarily have all the skills or the competencies required.
So when we start seeing some of the reaction, I'm just taking a look, it's not very difficult to find this reaction. Solidarity going to launch a legal action against DISCEM over their no whites policy. I suppose there's the problem again, isn't it, Tabea, with the wording? The wording is so divisive, it's now almost become a racial issue within BEE. And the problem now with the no hiring of whites has now also become an issue. What do you make of that?
You see, that's exactly the point. Why we have a problem with the tone is that it came across in such a way that it created division. It was quite divisive in the way in which it was put across. And whilst we believe that everything in terms of the act was adhered to in terms of what the CEO was saying, we recognize that it was not said in the spirit of employment equity, and it was not advancing what we look at as diversity, equality, and inclusion, where everybody would feel that this is a home, where the environment as well as the values of the organization are promoting an environment of diversity, inclusivity, and equality. Well, I'm quite interested to see what the fight with solidarity is going to be about, because actually, as far as I'm concerned, the CEO has complied with all the prescripts of the law. One of the things that he mentioned was the fact that if any position is to be filled, then he needs to be alerted to it and he needs to give the permission to the appointment of the person. What that means is that should there be a deviation, in my mind, is that should there be a deviation where a suitable black candidate cannot be found and the organization is then forced to employ a white person, because there isn't a suitable person from the designated group, he would be the one who would sanction the deviation. He would be the one who would approve the deviation. In terms of his letter, he does make mention of the fact that he would look at all appointments. So in my mind, I believe that he is willing to look at deviation when it does come through based on race skills or skills that cannot be found amongst persons with from designated groups.
Tabea, I hope the line stays with me. We are starting to lose your line a little bit, so I'm going to try this next question. I hope your connection stabilizes. Just on the article regarding solidarity, I said on Business Tech this morning, Dis-Chem, according to Solidarity, maybe you'd like to comment on this. According to Solidarity, Dis-Chem's apparently standing policy is in violation of South Africa's Employment Equity Act. They go on to say racial legislation and policy must not be a punishment, but must focus on redress. Dis-Chem wants to establish a hardline racial policy. I realize you've only just heard that from me now the first time, but I'm wondering if you have a reaction.
Correct. I mean, employment equity is really about redress. We redressing the ills of the past, and we are seeking to ensure that there's equitable representation in the labor market. So I do not understand the idea of punishment unless if the tonality of the letter seemed to imply that white people were being punished, which is something that we wouldn't promote at all. We are saying in terms of the Act that if no suitably qualified person is found in a particular group and the position needs to be filled, there can be a deviation and a white person can be put in that role.
And just as this line is stabilizing a little bit as well, Tabea, let me ask you this, because I would contend as well that when we see the memo coming out and saying that it would be incorporated into management's bonus structure, that's also upsetting quite a lot of people, saying that if you do this, there will be an incentive for you. This is not being done because it's the right thing to do, according to Dis-Chem. It'll be built into a bonus structure, also coming across as badly worded and tone deaf when it comes to the objectives of BEE.
Correct. I think that the idea that it was linked together in that way tended to communicate something of punishment. I guess that's what Solidarity is referring to. But in all honesty, every single organization has KPIs. A person is given a job description, and with that are incentives for achieving the performance. So if amongst that would be employment equity as a KPI, it stands to reason that the people who achieve the requirements would be incentivized for achieving that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
It's been an awful long time, as I mentioned in the introduction to our discussion, Tabea, as well. 23.3% to 30.7%, just over 7 percentage points. That's around 28 years or so as well. It's not happening at the pace it should be. Where is the resistance coming from? Why is it so difficult to implement when there are such clear guidelines, frameworks, and we just spoke about incentives in this case? Why aren't we seeing better growth of BEE and triple BEE?
Let me just correct, it's not BEE, it would be EE. Employment equity BEE is much broader than that. So some of the barriers that we're finding is that organizations, first of all, are not even doing the analysis properly. When we look at, there's a place in the reporting where organizations are supposed to indicate the barriers that they have. Very few indicate barriers. Very few organizations indicate barriers. And if there were no barriers, then we would see an accelerated transformation, which is not the case. So we are assuming as a commission that there are barriers. And these barriers are not being identified properly and then being addressed properly. That's the first thing. Those barriers could be in the area of selection, could be in the area of recruitment, could be in promotion, could be in the way salaries are structured, that salaries tend to disadvantage Black people. One of the examples would be that I feel is a real problem is how a lot of the time when a person applies for a position, they're requested to submit their payslip. And if historically that person has earned a lesser salary from their previous employer because they're Black. Now, if you're asking for their pay slip in order to give them a new salary, you would still keep their salary lower than their comparators. So those are some of the things that we see are problematic. But over and above that is really the issue that I raised earlier, where I said it seems that DISCEM had not incorporated employment equity into its strategy. Employment equity was seen as a standalone, and the strategy, the business strategy, was promoting other things that were in the KPIs, and people were being rewarded for that. And as it is in life, people will always do the things that give them rewards. So the fact that they're now incorporating it into their strategy and aligning it into the ethos of the organization is critical. And it's something that most organizations just don't do. Employment equity remains a tick box exercise. And for that reason, we will never achieve what we seek to achieve.
Just very briefly, as I say goodbye, there was an apology about that initial memo that went out. As briefly as you can, Tabea, was that good enough? Do you think too much damage has been done? Because here you and I are still sitting on television talking about this. An apology came out. Was it good enough?
I believe it was good enough. I think that the board contextualized the intent of the organization. I also think that it was good because it's gotten South Africa talking about very important issues. We are working through it, we're conversing and creating new narratives about what it really means and changing perceptions about what it's about. So I think for as long as we don't dialogue about it and it becomes a holy cow that we don't approach, we will never touch it and make progress.
Holy cow that we don't approach. Tabea, thank you very much. Indeed, I appreciate your time. Tabea Kabinde is the chairperson for the Commission for Employment Equity in South Africa, talking about EE quite correctly, saying EE, not triple BEE, as I made the error a little bit earlier.